Alright guys, so I know there's been some long-standing debates and confusion involving Acrid's two passives, Poison and Blight, but the majority of public discourse is surrounded by misinformation, unsuitable testing, arguments, and drama. I don't care about any of it. I'm just here to show how to conduct proper scientific tests, so that's what I'm going to do. First things first, I want to mention that this video is more than an hour and a half long, but just the first 13 minutes provided give you all the information you need. The explanations, results, and conclusions. The rest of the video is just raw footage shown for transparency. It's also provided for the curious minds who want to see exactly how each test was conducted. So Blight and Poison, let's go over what they're all about. Both of these passives are damage over time that is able to be applied using both of Acrid's secondary attacks, Caustic Leap, and Epidemic. Neither damage over time are able to proc items, only the initial hit of the attack that applies the Blight or Poison stack. So on one side we have Blight. This passive deals a flat 60% damage per second and can be applied multiple times to an enemy. Each stack of Blight has a 5-second duration before it expires, and applying another stack does not refresh the duration like Bleed. With this passive, the main source of damage is stacking it, so items that reduce cooldown reduction or that give extra charges of skills are sought after. On the other side, we have Poison. This passive deals damage that scales with the enemy's health, about 1% of the enemy's HP per second. The more HP the enemy has, the more damage Poison will do. It does, however, have a damage cap of 5000% damage per second. Poison combats low health enemies with a check to see if the damage dealt is more or less than 100% base damage per second. If less, the damage will default to this value, which is a little more than 1.5 times the damage of a single Blight stack. The dot lasts 10 seconds, which is double the length of Blight, but neither can it stack, which means if it is applied to an enemy, it's dealing its maximum potential damage. Poison's unique characteristic is that by itself it cannot kill enemies, leaving them at 1 HP. On first glance, this could feel like a problem, but since all of your skills also afflict base damage, throwing out another Epidemic or some other area of effect item will easily clean up. So before we actually get into it, we need to go over what constitutes as a valid test, preempt some questions, and go over which tests didn't stand up to scrutiny and why. This video is a direct comparison between Blight and Poison passives. For this to be as authentic of a test as possible, every single other variable has to stay the same. There are several factors that affect the efficacy of damage dealt. Difficulty, ambient level, which is the enemy level, which is scaled by time and stage count. There's player level, items, skill loadouts, and playstyle. For each test, I've set all of these variables to be identical to each other, using consistent testing and console commands so we can get accurate results. It was clear early on that using damage scaling items like watches or armor piercing rounds for each scenario was meaningless. They scaled both of the passives the same percentage, making each equally faster. The only goal of the test is to see the difference between the two passives, and removing these redundancies also means fewer tests to perform. This is also not a video comparing two different Acrid playstyles. To get a proper measurement of each passive, we need to use and measure the same loadouts. Comparing a Bite playstyle with a Spit one is absolutely pointless, since the Bite itself would skew the results. Bite itself is an incredibly strong skill, 320% damage, alongside the Slayer modifier, which scales the Bite damage up to 3 times its original. This would leave a lot less room to showcase the pure damage of the passives. That being said, in some of these tests I did include Bite, just to be thorough and test every build, mainly because I knew someone would yell about it in the comments, but that is why I would not consider them to be reasonable tests for comparing passive damage. With Neurotoxin, for the Spit secondary attack, you are able to apply Blight and Poison at the same rate as you would with Bite, but only dealing a flat non-scaling 240% damage. However, solely using Epidemic, Acrid Special, is the best way to test and compare the two passives. Essentially, it's an auto-aiming Spit with even less damage at 100%. Using the least amount of damage dealt outside of the two passives as possible will yield the most accurate results. This being said, I did try and include as much diversity in the builds to represent any and all playstyles. An important note, the tests conducted with the lowest possible cooldown reduction with alien heads and purities are showcasing the stacking capacity of Blight at its absolute maximum potential, which is Blight stacking reaching a 0.5 second cooldown. These tests specifically assume you play without getting hit or killed. In these tests I use God mode to solely measure damage dealt without worrying about dodging or dying. Since poison does not stack damage, the only change to poison in these minimum cooldown scenarios is the amount of damage from the increased frequency of the physical attacks, with Blight obviously receiving the same. To achieve absolute maximum cooldown reduction on all of Acrid's skills, you will need to acquire either 9 Purities, 10 Alien Heads, or 4 Light Flux Pauldrons. Light Flux greatly reduces your attack speed for your primary and secondary attacks, but not your utility or special, which means you can still spam your Leap and Epidemic with it. Obviously, you can mix any of these to achieve the same effect, down to a half-second cooldown reduction on all abilities. For a pseudo cooldown effect, you can stack charges of your skills with vacuum mags, lysate cells, and afterburner as well. I mentioned earlier that I used console commands to regulate all the variables and passive scaling factors: ambient level, time, stage count, and player level. The mid-game command sets the time to 23 minutes, stage count to 6, ambient level to 17, and player level to 15. The late game command sets the time to 58 minutes, stage to 9, ambient level to 60, and player level to 24. We use both of these in their respective tests to accurately identify how each performs at different points in the run. The difficulty will be stated in the left bottom corner of the test, but most of the tests are performed at drizzle difficulty to ensure that the scaling rate is as low as possible. And so I got to work. Weeks of constant testing, multiple iterations gone through, using any and all skill combinations and enemy encounters I could think of to try and really get a big picture and overview of Blight and Poison. We put them up against mithrix, hordes of golems and titans, and fought off the scariest of Celestine enemies. We also gave Acrid maxed out cooldown reduction in a few tests to really push Blight to its limits and see what it could do. All of this work, and 24 distinct tests later, and we got our data. With frame perfect timers and a whole proven accurate dataset, we're now able to really dig into and understand the differences between these two passives. So what did we find out? Well, after all these tests comparing Blight and Poison, we can present the results in a simple chart that shows the time both passives took for each test. In this chart, the higher the bar gets, the more time that passive took to complete the test. And just a heads up, we will be summarizing each test later on in the video. So of the 24 tests, Poison won in 15, Blight won in 8, and one resulted in a tie. Of Blight's 8 wins, half of them secured the lead by under 10 seconds, while 2 of the tests took the lead by over 20 seconds. Of these 8 total wins, 7 of them relied on maximum cooldown reduction items to stack Blight to its absolute maximum potential and uphold that max stack amount for the duration of the kill. Reminder, these tests were performed with God mode enabled. Of the 15 Poison wins, we had only one test that was able to secure the lead by a few seconds. The rest took the lead by large margins and were multiple times faster than Blight. These wins ranged from 1 minute to 96 minutes faster than Blight. What this means is that even though Blight had completed some tests faster, you can see that Poison was able to maintain a similar time to kill, while also able to surpass its counterparts' times by considerable margins, all without any reliance on cooldown reduction items. The likelihood that a player is able to collect enough cooldown reduction items and then maintain the needed amount of Blight stacks to surpass Poison while staying alive is pretty low. This is due in part to enemy interference, especially as difficulty goes up. Enemy attacks no longer just threaten your HP, but now threaten to lower your damage output. This takes away your time to keep up the increased need to apply Blight stacks to maintain damage. Dodging and stacking aren't always mutual here. Although I don't touch on other damaging items for these tests, it is important to mention that relying on Purity to lower cooldown on Blight will significantly reduce proccing potential and luck-based damage, which would lower your overall damage output if you are using proc items. You would have to collect those various amounts of alien heads, light flux, vacuum mags, afterburners, and lysate cells I talked about earlier in order to reach maximum cooldown reduction. All of this in a single run, to gain the advantage that Blight has over Poison in those max cooldown reduction tests that Blight won. Now taking a look at the tests that had the greatest time differences between the two passives, we see that it was itemless against Mithrix using Epidemic only, tests 5 and 6. This playstyle has been pinned by the community to Poison as its only viable playstyle, so as you would guessed it, Poison was able to easily deal with both mid and late game tests at around 2.5 minutes each. Blight, on the other hand, 13.5 minutes for mid-game, and yeah, late-game test took almost 99 minutes, which is actually insane. So Poison takes the win by substantial margins against Mithrix when you are not able to apply large amounts of stacks at a given time for any reason. Now let's take a look at the playstyle that has been pinned on Blight as its strongest playstyle. Full use of Bite, Caustic Leap, and Epidemic. Test 3 and 4. With no aiding items, the mid and late game tests both had lost up to almost 2 minutes. Blight was slower, so we stepped it up. Test 9 and 10. Now we maxed out cooldown reduction, Blight hyper stacking at this point, up to 18 consistent stacks. What did we find? Well, in mid game, Blight won by 8 seconds, and late game tied. So what does this tell us? We know without a reason of a doubt that Poison wins the less dangerous, minimal debuff application playstyle of Test 5 and 6. And Poison also wins the more aggressive melee fast debuff application playstyle without cooldown reduction items. And Poison ends up tying with Blight as the game progresses when we maxed out Blight's potential with maxed out cooldown reduction items. Again, wins are wins, but if Poison in a normal damage scenario only barely loses to Blight at Blight's absolute peak, and wins by margins of 10 minutes plus in its own best category, then it just seems that Poison will be significantly more reliable against Mithrix than Blight would, in any given accurate testable scenario. Again, all of these conclusions are strictly from the test results of this video, and different tests will provide different results depending on the tested scenario. This video does not prove that Poison is definitively better than Blight, but should be used to get a better general idea on how the two passives stand up against each other in in-game scenarios. Remember, ultimately, it's up to the player to decide what they want to do to have fun. I'm not here to tell you what skills to use and make you feel bad if you don't. Always play the game how you want to play it. For any other scenarios you would like to see tested, I encourage you to download Debug Toolkit mod to have full access to all of the commands I used in my tests. I will provide a full list of commands in the description below. Alright, now with all that covered, let's go over each test, summarizing the events and giving my thoughts behind them. For starters, here's a table that will show all of the test results, the winner being colored in its respective highlight. The first several batches of these tests we're going to look at will be on Drizzle difficulty versus Mithrix Phase 1. In the first set of tests, Tests 1 and 2, we used Neurotoxin, Caustic Leap, and Epidemic with no aiding items. This means that every single skill other than Accurate's primary was consistently used off cooldown until Mithrix was dead. For mid-game, Poison received a time of 1 minute 32 seconds, while Blight was able to finish in 1 minute 26 seconds. It was a close one for mid-game, but Blight was on top by a few seconds. Into late game, however, Poison was able to win by over 2 minutes, with a time of 2 minutes and 3 seconds, compared to Blight's 4 minutes 16 seconds. Tests 3 and 4 were conducted using Bite, Caustic Leap, and Epidemic, with no aiding items. Similar to Tests 1 and 2, all skills were consistently used off cooldown. Mid-game results, Poison at 1 minute 23 seconds, and Blight at 1 minute 25 seconds. Another really close test. Late game results, Poison at 1 minute 45 seconds, Blight at 3 minutes 19 seconds. I was really curious about the outcome of this test since the community has been forcing the concept that Poison Accurate has to play the passive and ranged playstyle, while Blight has to play the stronger melee skills and be aggressive. But these tests prove that Poison can also play with the melee playstyle and still surpass Blight. And the next test will prove that Blight does not do a great job of adapting to the passive playstyle that Poison is said to strictly use. Tests 5 and 6 were using Accurate's Epidemic skill only, nothing else, and no aiding items. Mid-game results, Poison at 2 minutes 42 seconds, Blight at 13 minutes 31 seconds. Late game results, Poison 2 minutes 27 seconds, Blight at a whopping 98 minutes and 50 seconds. I had to run the game at 15 times speed so I didn't lose my fucking mind during this damn test. Poison was faster by 11 minutes in mid-game and 96 minutes in late game. Tests 7 and 8 used Epidemic skill only, and maximum cooldown reduction items like Alien Heads and Purities. I bring this up earlier, but forced maximum cooldown reduction tests show Blight at its absolute maximum stacking potential, while poison damage is scaled the same as if it were Tests 5 and 6. Mid-game results, Poison at 1 minute 31 seconds, and Blight at 1 minute 20 seconds, another really close test. Late game results: Poison at 1 minute 52 seconds, Blight at 2 minutes 32 seconds. Tests 9 and 10 used Bite and Epidemic only, with maximum cooldown reduction. Mid-game results: Poison at 1 minute 10 seconds, Blight at 1 minute 2 seconds. Late game results: both Poison and Blight actually tie during this late game test. Tests 11 and 12 were tested against 4 Golems and 1 Stone Titan, using Epidemic only, and no aiding items. These tests show Blight and Poison in natural teleporter event situations that you will encounter throughout your run. In mid-game, Poison finished at 42 seconds, Blight at 1 minute 43 seconds. Late game results: Poison 31 seconds, Blight 1 minute 12 seconds. Test 13 was tested against 4 Celestine Golems, using Epidemic only and no aiding items. These Celestine tests provide a really good look into how the two passives will hold up during looped gameplay when tier 2 elites, such as Malachites and Celestines, are now able to frequently spawn. This is also why I used the late game command only for these Celestine tests, since you will never encounter tier 2 elites on stages earlier than stage 6. So late game results: Poison finished at 1 minute 42 seconds, Blight 4 minutes 6 seconds. Tests 14 and 15 were tested against 4 Golems and 1 Stone Titan, using Epidemic only, and maximum cooldown reduction. Mid-game results: Poison 16 seconds, Blight at 8 seconds. Late game, Poison 11 seconds, and Blight 7 seconds. Test 16 was tested against 4 Celestine Golems, using Epidemic only, and maximum cooldown reduction. Late game results: Poison 37 seconds, and Blight was 17 seconds. At this point we can see that the trend is forming. When Blight is tested at its absolute maximum potential, using these cooldown reduction items, and being able to apply stacks as quickly as possible, we see that it constantly succeeds. Test 17 was tested against 4 Celestine Greater Wisp, using Epidemic only and no aiding items. Late game resulted in Poison finishing at 1 minute 54 seconds, while Blight finished at 6 minutes 23 seconds. And lastly, for the drizzle tests, we have Test 18, which was tested against 4 Celestine Greater Wisp, using Epidemic only and maximum cooldown reduction. Late game results: Poison 48 seconds, and Blight at 24 seconds. Alright, so the last 6 tests were done on Monsoon difficulty to give a better idea of how Poison and Blight compare on higher difficulties due to increased rate that enemies scale. Tests 19 and 20. These tests use Epidemic and Neurotoxin skills only, and no aiding items. Mid-game result: Poison at 2 minutes 5 seconds, Blight 6 minutes 42 seconds. Late game results: Poison at 2 minutes 8 seconds, and Blight was at 8 minutes and 1 second. Test 21 was tested against 4 Golems and 1 Stone Titan, using Epidemic only and no aiding items. Late game results: Poison 31 seconds, and Blight took 1 minute 10 seconds. Tests 22 and 23 were tested against a horde of 10 Celestine Golems, and used Neurotoxin, Caustic Leap, and Epidemic with no aiding items. Mid-game results: Poison at 1 minute 30 seconds, and Blight at 2 minutes 8 seconds. Late game results: Poison 1 minute 21 seconds, and Blight 1 minute 30 seconds. And finally, Test 24. We tested this against 4 Celestine Golems and used Epidemic only, with maximum cooldown reduction. Late game results: Poison 37 seconds, and Blight 16 seconds. Alright, so the rest of the video is going to show all the raw footage of each test, just as proof of testing accuracy, and for any of you freaks that just want to watch it all. Hope I was able to provide a useful and accurate insight on which scenarios each passive succeeds in, and better informing you guys on the actual capabilities of Poison and Blight, while also clearing up misinformation from previous videos and spreadsheets regarding Blight and Poison's comparison. Big thanks to Race for helping organize the script because I suck at writing, and recording a couple of the test scenarios for me. If you like this sort of content and want to learn more about the game, I highly recommend you subscribe and check out some of my old YouTube videos. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.